Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Coyne, and I'm here with Skills, and I'll be talking to you about using an approach called acceptance and commitment therapy with parents. The title of the talk is Raising Children with Autism Doing What Matters. And if you have questions, please feel free to send them to the email displayed on the screen. And if you are only listening to the webinar, you can send them to info@skillsglobal.com. Okay, so our learning objectives for today are, for me, hopefully to give you a description of acceptance and commitment therapy, which we call ACT for short. I'm going to talk just about, in depth, about a particular component of the program, which is called valuing. And that's a motivational piece that's involved in the program that can be very useful to help with parents who you may be working with. And if you're a parent yourself, it can be helpful in terms of helping to direct your ways of engaging with your child and your ways of engaging in behavioral parent training programs, which are evidence-based, which we know work quite well with different behavioral issues. And then finally, I'll give you some practice recommendations based on what we know about this area so far. Next slide. So we should be on the Getting Present slide. And ACT is what we call an experiential approach. And probably the best way for me to teach you what that means is actually to invite you, or to give you the opportunity to try a really brief exercise, which we call Getting Present, okay? So if you're willing, I'm actually going to do this with you, so you can see me doing it if you choose, if you opt out not to do that. So very simply, what we're going to do, and this is often the way that I might start if I was using this in an individual therapy context. For us, for our purposes right now, it's just going to get us sort of centered as we go through this talk, okay? So if you're willing, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and just get comfortable in your chair or your couch or wherever you're sitting. And I want you for a few moments to just connect in with your breathing. Just very simply focus your attention on your breath. Notice each in-breath as you inhale, and each out-breath as you exhale. As you strive to do this, you may notice your mind wandering. This often happens. In fact, my mind is wandering, and it's wondering about, I wonder how this is working in a webinar. So that's something that's very typical. And that's just mental activity for you to notice. And when you notice being distracted from your breath, see if you can just bring your attention back to your breath. And take a few more nice deep breaths, and then when you're ready, open your eyes. Welcome back. So that's a very simple example of what we mean by getting present, which is a component of ACT. And now we'll start getting into the meat of our talk. Parenting is tough for all parents with children of all different ages, but it's especially difficult for parents who are raising children on the spectrum. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of data. This is from a community sample of parents. Did you know, actually, that compared to people who do not have children, parents report lower emotional well-being, sense of psychological health. They report feeling positive emotions less frequently, more frequent negative emotions, and they also tend to have more difficulty or report more conflict in marital situations, and they also report greater levels of depression than non-parents do. And this is parents of typically developing children for the most part. Next slide, which says, "Dear Autism, you make things hard, not impossible. You overwhelm us, but we learn patience. You separate, but we unite. We will conquer you." And you should just take a moment to consider that. That's written by a man named Stuart Duncan, who was the father of a child with autism, just to get us focused and doing a little perspective taking on what it is like for parents to be asked to go above and beyond and to have so many more demands made on them, both psychologically, emotionally, and also physically and behaviorally in terms of parenting children with special needs. So it's important to remember, I'm often amazed when I work with parents who are struggling with children who have special needs, especially those with severe behavior problems, because I put myself in their shoes and I think, my goodness, they are the most resilient, amazing people. And I don't know how much or how well I would survive under conditions like that. And doing that sort of perspective taking is really important. It's also important to understand pragmatically the practicalities of raising children with autism, because any sort of intervention that we do with parents occurs within a context. And this is the context of children or of parents who are raising children with autism. These guys, we often ask them to devote a significant amount of time, often 25 hours or more a week, into their child's treatment. And this may include direct care, this may include coaching, behavioral coaching. It may also include things like driving to appointments, coordinating, speaking with school personnel, advocating for their children. So it's not surprising then that compared to parents of typically developing children, parents raising children with autism report much higher levels of stress and depression, poor overall quality of life, because life reduces, I think, a lot to dealing with the things that are immediately in front of you that must be dealt with. And some of the other things like self-care get left behind. They also report more marital and financial stress. And they have, on top of that, lower perceptions of their physical health. Next slide. In the context of all of this, the demands are very real that they have. They do have children who have special needs, in addition to other siblings or other kids in the family, spouses, and other family members who may also need things. So today what we're going to talk about is how to help parents live lives that are meaningful to them, specifically how ACT can assist with behavioral parent training despite all of the stress that they experience. So we can't help parents conquer autism necessarily, but we can certainly help minimize the extent to which autism conquers the lives of parents who face many, many challenges. And so what we're working towards is making the context of their lives a bit more manageable so that they can more effectively parent their children. Okay. I want to start with just thinking about how do parents actually cope when things are really difficult. When people experience stressors that are continuous and chronic and that feel out of their control, often what happens is they will rely on a strategy called experiential avoidance, which simply means if I don't want to have an experience, I avoid it. If it's a thought or a feeling, what I'm going to do is avoid situations that elicit that thought or feeling. If it's in my mind, I might try to distract myself from thinking about it. I might suppress my emotions by minimizing them. Oh, it's not that bad, and I'll feel so terrible, or not talking about them, not expressing them to others. Bottling would be a good way to describe this approach. Okay? And what we found in our research in our lab is that, like most humans, parents raising children with autism are no different. They do, like most of us, sometimes avoid or attempt to suppress negative emotions. Now, everybody knows this is pretty useful in the short term. For example, when I go to the doctor's office and I'm going to receive a shot in the arm, I prefer not to watch that shot. And in the short term, that kind of avoidance is extremely useful. But in the long term, it can actually make acute situations even worse. It has a downside. From a behavioral perspective, I want to talk a little bit about avoidance itself. What we're avoiding when we avoid are things that are aversive, negative thoughts, unpleasant feelings, physical sensations. For example, a parent raising a child with autism might experience pain or sadness if they see their child rejected, or they might feel frustration if they have been trying to teach a particular thing or have the child engage in a particular behavior and it's not working. Any manner of these things. So what happens to our behavior when there's an aversive stimulus in the environment? Think of it like this. If there's a lion, what do? If you're a rabbit, you run. You either freeze or you run. You don't do anything else. Those are the two things that are necessary for your survival. Okay? So what happens when there are aversive things in the environment? You don't notice other things that are going on that may be good things. So when parents are struggling with trying to minimize negative emotions through avoidance, they may not be accessing other existing positive reinforcers in the environment. In addition, when you're a rabbit, you run. You don't notice it's the sunset. You don't notice if there are things for you to eat. You don't notice if you're warm or cool, if your fur is itchy or anything like that. You have one narrow, inflexible response to that aversive. You run. So what we see is a narrow and inflexible repertoire. And this is where experiential avoidance tends to get folks into trouble. They tend to only avoid things as their sole method of coping. The other thing that this does when you experience an aversive thing in your environment is you may experience heightened arousal, at least over the short run. And that's necessary for your survival. If you're facing a lion, you really need to have a sympathetic nervous system response so that your body's mobilized for threat. What if these aversive stimuli exist long-term, over time? What happens is you're chronically in this stressed out, aroused state. Okay? The more you try to avoid it, the worse it gets. Okay? The next thing that happens is this generates insensitivity to your context. You're only focused on avoidance, as we mentioned, and you're not noticing anything really in the environment, any other information, whether it be reinforcing or not. Okay? Over time, when you experience chronic things that you feel like you need to suppress, this produces general behavioral suppression, learned helplessness. Now, when I've worked with parents, I know that they have hit this place when they come in and they say, that doesn't work, I tried that. But, I can't do this. All sorts of things. They start to give lots of reasons for why maybe a behavioral program won't work, asking to maybe switch to another care provider, all of these sorts of things that happen. It's sort of like a learned helplessness because it's just so hard to deal with. Okay? Let's think about how experiential avoidance might work in the context of helping parents engage in parent training or engaging in ABA programming. In order for parents to actually engage in these programs, a number of things have to happen. First of all, they have to be willing to be consistent. If they're going to engage in this conditionally, and when things get tough, to stop, they're not going to be successful. And we see this over and over and over again. Folks are great at knowing what they need to do. It's much harder if they're out in public and a difficult behavior is showing up, or they're exhausted and they have 25 other things that they need to do to engage in this behavior. So we need willingness to be consistent. We also need willingness to stay in contact with negative or uncomfortable experiences. So think back to when you may first have been learning to apply behavioral principles and actually working with children who are difficult. Think about what that felt like. I don't know about you, but when I first started, it was surprising how uncomfortable I felt if I had to do a planned ignoring program, or if I had to use physical prompting, or if I had to use a timeout and notice a tantrum or notice self-injurious behavior, to see all of these things. So willingness to stay present and do what you need to do in the face of these difficult or uncomfortable experiences, that's key to success and continued engagement in parent training. Persistence is the next thing. Very often we'll have parents who try things for a while and then they sort of peter off and they don't kind of continue with what they need to be doing because they forgot, it was too hard, they got stressed out, or they didn't have time. And all of us have been in those situations with many things in our lives, so I'm sure we can all relate to that. But persistence is important. How do we shape that? Okay. We need use of positive parenting strategies, meaning things like labeled praise, providing positive reinforcers, attention to and noticing good behaviors or desirable behaviors. We all know that people tend to notice negative behaviors or unwanted behaviors. There's tons of research on that those are the things that tend to get more attention in classrooms and in homes from parents. We also know correlates of behavior problems in children, including lax parenting, which means acquiescing to demands, giving in, not being consistent, not setting a limit, or giving in when a child's behavior becomes too extreme. Harsh parenting, being more punitive, or overreactive parenting, getting overly emotional and absolutely overreacting in anger to a child, or implementing a parent training skill from an angry place. These are really unhelpful behaviors. Okay, if we really break down parent training, these are the kinds of things we need to attend to and shape. Parents need patience. They need to wait and hang on for change to occur, because it will happen. And often, shaping is a slow and arduous process. Very often, when I see kids in the office or in school consultation settings, whether I'm working with young clinicians or if I'm working with parents, if they've got a child who's experiencing really severe behavior problems, they think it's insurmountable. They have a story in their minds about what is possible for this child, what sort of improvement can work or is available to them. And very often, they don't think that they will see very much improvement. They also don't think they themselves can handle the severity of the behavior problems at hand, okay? So what we need is for parents to step out of that story and sort of think about, what if you could? What if you actually could do this? What if that were possible to move in that direction? That's important. And then finally, this is one of the hardest things. I mean, none of us can tell the future, and neither can parents. And so sitting with the uncertainty of, whether this will work, whether it won't work, whether, this type of life or this much life or these types of activities will be available to their children if they engage in this program. Sitting with uncertainty is probably one of the hardest things, okay? And so all of these things are pieces that we need to consider when we think about engaging parents in programming. Now, the literature is beginning to move in this direction where we're starting to think about addressing cognitive and emotional variables in parents. Okay, next slide. So what's our answer to this? Well, one answer is to think about the ACT approach. An ACT, really simply, in a nutshell, means accepting the moment for what it is, with whatever emotions or feelings it brings, connecting with the things that are most important to you. We call those values in ACT, and I'll talk about what those are in a little bit. And in the service of those values, even in the presence of strong, unwanted feelings or thoughts, taking action, taking even small steps towards those things that you care about. And that's it in a nutshell. And I love this little picture on the slide. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone, because that is indeed where ACT picks up and other interventions leave off. This is a picture of what we call in ACT the hexaflex. You'll notice that it has 6 points, and it's divided into 2 sides. And what you're looking at on the left side of the screen in this slide are the acceptance and mindfulness processes. Okay? These are processes that help parents focus on accepting difficult emotions, on staying and contacting the present moment, just as we did at the very beginning of this talk. That getting centered exercise that we did was an example of an exercise to shape in parents present moment awareness. Diffusion is sort of a fancy way of saying, noticing that your thoughts are just that, they're thoughts, they're not literal truths. The reverse of that is fusion, and that, in addition to experiential avoidance, is a key treatment target of ACT. Fusion means experiencing your thoughts as literal truths. Okay? Self as context is noticing that you are an observer of your experience. Your experience isn't the sum total of you. So, for example, if I have a story of myself or a thought about myself as, I don't know, not being a good parent trainer, I separate from that thought. I notice that I'm having a thought that I'm not a great parent trainer. I'm not struggling with whether it's true or not. I'm just noticing I'm having this thought and that I am separate from this thought. Okay, so that's self as context. So why are these processes necessary? A little cartoon to give you an example of that. You may have noticed when we did that getting present exercise at the very beginning of the talk that your mind was probably wandering a lot. I know mine was, and I know that that's not an uncommon experience whenever I've taught these workshops to staff, care providers, parents, clients, whoever, kids even, especially kids. And you'll notice that our little person has lots of questions that he's thinking about: who, what, where, when, how long, all of that. And his mind is very, very busy. Meanwhile, his friend, the dog, who does not have language, is merely thinking of, be nice to have a bone. Okay? So one of the things that we can help parents with is slowing down and noticing the stream of thoughts and how those thoughts occur for us and the psychological properties or functions of those thoughts that they have with us. So, for example, if I have a negative thought about myself, like, wow, I look silly on this webinar, that might organize my behavior such that I am going to fix my hair and see if I'm smiling the right way and am I sitting up correctly. And I'm going to lose my focus on actually what I'm saying to you folks, okay? So that pulls me up and out of the present moment. Now, when that happens to parents, guess what? That's not so helpful, because a sensitive, responsive parent needs to be more aware of many things that are going on for their child in that particular moment. If they're stuck in their minds, listening to this stream of thinking, as our friend in the cartoon is, that pulls them up. It gives them less contact to other stimuli that may be useful in organizing their behavior in different ways. Next slide. Cognitive fusion. I wanted to give you a little example of that. Okay, and you'll remember that I mentioned that fusion, and cognitive fusion is another way of saying that, involves experiencing your thoughts as the real thing. So if you are willing, I would like to show you this, okay? And all I want you to do is be a good scientist and just observe what happens, okay? If you're willing, go ahead and close your eyes. And I want you to imagine an apple, your favorite kind of apple, whatever kind that is. It might be a Granny Smith, it might be a Red Delicious, it might be a Gala, or some other kind of apple. Then I want you to imagine that you're holding it in your hand. I want you to imagine whether it's cool or warm. Has it just come out of the refrigerator, or was it perhaps sitting on the counter? And I want you to imagine that you're bringing this apple to your face. I want you to imagine what that apple smells like. Does it have a scent? Is it really fresh? You can kind of get that tang and sharpness of the apple. And now I want you to imagine taking a bite of that apple and noticing the juiciness or the crispness or the sweetness or the tartness as your teeth take a chunk out of that apple. And now I want you to imagine pulling it away from your face and noticing that you've just bitten off half a worm. Did anybody have kind of a disgust reaction? Okay. We didn't really have an apple. There are no apples here. There's a picture on the slide. And I created an apple for you out of thin air with only words. And yet, with those words, I was able, at least for some of you, to elicit a physiological reaction. Perhaps you were salivating at first. Perhaps you were hungry, thinking, I would like an apple. If you don't like apples, you may have been having an entirely different experience. Nonetheless, real. Okay? Fusion is experiencing our thoughts just like we did then as real. So ACT targets that through helping us notice these are just thoughts. And these physiological or emotional reactions are things that we can detach from and have some distance from. Okay. Moving on. The second half of the ACT model involves commitment and behavior change processes. And this involves the components on the right, that's my right hand, the right side of the model. I have trouble telling my right from my left still after all these years. Okay. And you notice on this side, we have values. Okay. Values I will talk about in a little while. But what you should know about them is when we say them in ACT, we don't mean your beliefs about right and wrong, and we don't mean goals. What we do mean are things that you care about, things that you hold most dear, the things that you would fight not to give up in your life. Committed action is the next behavior change process or next component of the ACT model. And what that means is acting with awareness in the service of your values, even in the presence of difficult emotions or experiences. So the nice piece about ACT, or one thing I really appreciate about ACT is that it does have this component, the acceptance and mindfulness processes, which allow us to attend to how we respond to our own internal experiences and how they organize our behavior. And at the same time, it provides us a technology for changing behavior, for helping people change their behavior. Just like our thinker and our doer here in this next slide. So to sum up the ACT model, this is really how we think about it. And I'm going to read it to you so you can follow along with me. Okay? We're going to start down at the self as context component at the bottom of this slide. Given the distinction between you and the stuff you are struggling with and trying to change, now we move to acceptance. Are you willing to have that stuff fully and without defense? Now to diffusion, as it is, not as it says it is. Now to contact with the present moment. At this time, in this situation, we'll go to values and committed action and do what takes you in the direction of your chosen values right now. If the answer is yes, if you are able to say yes to that and mean it, what you have is what we call psychological flexibility. And that is the goal of ACT treatment, whether it's used as an augmentative treatment with behavioral parent training or some other approach, or whether it's used on its own. Okay, psychological flexibility simply means the ability to do what you need to do in the service of the things that you care about, even if things are really, really overwhelmingly hard and difficult. So you may, after hearing this, start to be thinking, now I'm starting to see how this might help parents remain engaged in the very difficult work of behavioral parent training or ABA programming. So now I want to walk you through how we might actually do this. How do we create motivation for change in parents who are really struggling, really overwhelmed? And I love this picture of this little guy, because think about what life might be for his parents, and think about what life might be for him. I wonder, have they thought about how insurmountable losing both legs or being born without both legs might have been? And yet look at him. He's beaming and happy and clearly growing and clearly living and doing the things that keep him with that big smile on his face. So how do we create motivation for change when things may seem insurmountable? Okay. We start, and I'm going to try and imagine and have you imagine that, you're just about to start working with a parent, and you would like for them to learn some things that are more effective strategies for working with their child, okay? And if this might be useful thinking about it this way. So the first step that you would do is help parents see what works and what doesn't, okay? Specifically, how does avoiding discomfort work? Now, from an ACT perspective, it's not really useful to kind of say, see, this works for you. Clearly this works for you. Do you not see that? Or this doesn't work, okay? I don't know about you guys, but I'm not the type of person that likes to be told what to do. I was always the type of kid that needed to see it for myself. And lo and behold, a lot of parents are too. A lot of us are, okay? So helping parents really connect with how things are working is important. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that, okay? So step one, helping parents see what works and what doesn't, how it works and how it doesn't work. And then step two, helping parents choose a meaningful and valued direction in which to move, okay? By helping them connect with what truly matters to them. How do you do this, you say? Next slide. Well, you keep calm and you do ABA. No kidding. ACT is strongly linked to applied behavioral analysis. It's all about helping parents notice the function of their behavior, okay? And there's a very simple tool that was developed by an ACT trainer named Kevin Polk, who is in Maine, who's worked with scores of clients of all types, including parents. And he calls it the matrix, okay? This is the tool that we use to help parents contact and get, without telling them necessarily, the function of their behavior, okay? At its heart, ACT can be really simplified down to teaching 2 discriminations. If you look at the top and the bottom of this picture of the matrix, you see 5 senses experiencing and mental experiencing. I'm going to explain it, and then I'm going to show you how I might walk a parent through it really simply, okay? 5 senses experiencing means focusing your attention on your present moment experience. Mental experiences means getting stuck or lost in your thoughts, okay? So I'm going to show you how I might teach a parent how to do this. I might say, I have this tool I want to show you. It's called the matrix. And we use this in the psychological flexibility approach. Are you willing to let me show you what this is? Once you get a yes from a parent, you're shaping engagement. Great, thank you. Reinforce, okay? If you have one, go ahead and pick up a pen. And what I want you to do is hold that pen, touch it, see how it feels to you. Notice the color. Okay. I want you to see if that pen makes any noise. Mine makes a banging noise. Clicking. Got it. Okay, great. We've noticed the color, so we've seen how it looks. Does it smell? Not too much, no. But I'm noticing how it smells. Okay. You could have parents even taste it to get the sense of taste. Okay. Got it? Great. Now what I want you to do is close your eyes and put that pen outside of your awareness. Have parents do that. Now I want you to think about that pen and notice everything that you noticed about that pen. Got it. That's the difference. That's the discrimination. It's as simple as that. Am I in the present moment noticing what's going on, or am I in my thoughts? And am I able to notice the difference? That's discrimination 1. If you look at the horizontal axis, we have towards and away. Towards are things that we move towards in our lives. For me, I like to move towards things like spending more time with my family. I also like to move towards chocolate chip cookies. Anything you want to move towards. Away are things that we move away from in our lives. For example, I like to stay away from feeling anxious. I don't love that sensation. It's unpleasant for me. Okay? Noticing the difference. Am I moving towards and am I moving away? Now, that's enough to get you started on the matrix, but what I'm going to do to further show you how this might actually work and be a useful clinical tool for you is I'm going to walk you through a case example, okay? This is not a real person, but she's made up from different people, clients, families, friends that I have known, and you may have also been in contact with. So I want you to imagine a 37-year-old woman. She's married, she has 3 children, and her middle child is 12, her daughter, and she has autism. She has an older brother who is 15. He's standing in the background. And the mom worries a lot about him because she's getting reports from the school that he's sometimes truant and his grades are very variable. And occasionally he gets into altercations with other kids, whether they're verbal. They haven't escalated to physical yet, but there's definitely some issues there. She also has a younger daughter who often provokes her middle daughter inadvertently. And her middle daughter, who is on the spectrum, can occasionally really, really get upset about this and get engaged in hitting her and things like that. So on top of this family situation, both parents have to work. Mom is the primary caregiver and the primary deliverer of whatever coaching is and intervention is supposed to be given to this little girl. She's also in charge of taking her to all her appointments, OT, PT, speech, language, talking to the school. Her husband doesn't feel so good at that, so she's the one that goes to all of the IEP meetings. All of these sorts of things. She's exhausted. She feels embarrassed about reaching out to other families or other friends who have typically developing children. She feels somewhat isolated. She feels embarrassed sometimes when her daughter acts up in public. And she's tired. Okay? So she has a story about herself that she is not enough to do all of the things that are required for her. So how does not enough and having that thought work for her? How does it organize her behavior? Well, one way is she might have thoughts like this. Why bother? I can't handle it. This speaks to when in the presence of an aversive stimulus, you experience a limited behavioral repertoire. Why bother? I can't. I just can't do it. How about this one? I lost my keys again. I'm so not in the present moment and not aware of what's going on around me. I'm constantly stuck in my mind and in my thoughts. I'm on autopilot. I constantly lose my keys. This happens to me all the time, incidentally. But for this mom, it's part of life as well. I'm in this all alone. It's all up to me. Might be another thought that she has that she wants to get away from. And notice how that works for her. You know, she may, because she feels isolated and therefore may continue to engage in isolating herself by avoiding others and avoiding scrutiny by others or judgments of others. She might have the lack of contact with social reinforcers. And I think a lot of parents, especially this mom, feel like they're just putting out fires and letting everything else go. So all they're doing is the bare essentials that they have to do. Everything else falls away. Self-care, enjoyment, entertainment. And this is what we see in families raising children with autism. There's not a lot of joint family time. There's not a lot of things going on behind the things that they must do or that they feel that they must do in the moment. Okay? So even if you have never done ACT before, I think it's really important to do a little bit of perspective taking and understanding the context in which you're trying to implement a behavioral program. Because a good behavior therapist understands and works on understanding all of these variables that can organize behavior. So next slide. So how I might work with this mom is I would bring her the matrix and I would say, describe some things that you want to move away from. I'm going to go back a slide, back to the not enough slide. And these might be some of the things that we write down on the matrix, next slide, on the lower left quadrant. These are things in our minds, or these are things in her minds that she's striving to move away from. Okay, all of these thoughts. Now, on the top left quadrant, I might say to her, well, what are some things you do to make these thoughts go away? Or to not think about these things, or to make those things, or to move away from those things? And she might say, well, I just put out fires, or I don't know, there's really nothing. Giving up might be something. Not taking phone calls might be another thing. Missing appointments. Not engaging in her parent training. All of these things. And I would mark them down in the upper left quadrant, in the away section. Now, they're on the top, the upper side, because they're things that she does. They're not things that she thinks. They're actually behaviors that are observable, okay? Sometimes folks put things up there like drinking, which is a way of avoiding things. Or in this case of marital conflict, the silent treatment, okay? Things like that. The next thing I would do is I would ask her, are those things effective at making those thoughts and feelings go away? Typically what people say is, yeah, they are. Well, for a short time. Well, what else can I do? Right? And so you just draw their attention to, so they work in the short term. How do they work in the long term? Are they gone for good? And if the answer is no, I just say, okay. Interesting. Okay. So we're noticing that they work in part, but they don't work all the way. And what I do is I draw little arrows from the bottom left quadrant to the top. So I'll draw a line connecting the thought to be avoided to the behavior used to avoid the thought. And then I'll draw a line back down because it's sort of a circular process. Okay? And what we see is being stuck. Spending a lot of time working at managing negative thoughts and feelings in such a way where we're not really doing anything to move towards the things that we care about. And that leads us to the next part of our intervention. Valuing, doing what matters. So I have a little cartoon here that illustrates what we mean, I think, not by valuing, but it's kind of ironic. We have someone in hospice who says, her last words, I should have bought more crap. I think very few of us would actually say that. And in fact, there's been a paper that was put together by a palliative care nurse, or hospice nurse actually, where she, over her career, had sort of collected a lot of data and anecdotes about the top 5 regrets of the dying. And I want to tell you what they were and what she found. One was, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that others expected of me. 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. 3, I wish I had had the courage to express my feelings. 4, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And then 5, I wish I'd let myself be happier. Okay. So when you hear all of these things together, this is sort of an example of what we might mean by valuing, those things that if we were to do it all over again, what would we do? So values are not goals, although they might include personal goals. But goals are in the service of something bigger. Values give us direction. How do we do a values assessment with folks? Well, it's actually kind of fun for us to try it with ourselves. And so we won't spend a ton of time on this today because time is slipping quickly past. But one way to get folks in contact with what they care about most is to say, if you had only one day left, how would you spend it? Who would you be with? What would you do? What would be the things that you really, really care about? Okay. There are many different ways to assess this. I'm going to give you just 2 quick ones today, but there are actually very lovely measures that have been developed in the ACT literature to assess values in different domains of life, relationships, parenting, leisure, work, education, etc. And so just keep in mind those are available as well. But these are 2 quick ones to give you the flavor of valuing. And if you're working with a parent in the context of doing parent training, I think sometimes these quicker ones actually are better. They're more time efficient. This is one that was developed by a fabulous clinician who worked with teens with emotional and behavioral special needs in South Australia. His name is Shane Curley. Hi, Shane, if you're watching. And what he would do is he would ask kids, well, what do you really care about? And lots of times kids would say, money. I want lots of money. And so he would do this little, I suppose, interview and say, well, what would you do if you were rich? And they would say, well, I'd buy a house and a car and an Xbox, and I would have a jet plane, and, I would, take the first space flight and all of that stuff. Okay, well, you still have a lot of money left over. Then what would you do? Then what would you do? And so eventually kids ran out of stuff that they could buy. And they started to say things like, I would give it to my family who love me, or I would use it to make sure that there were no more starving kids in the world. And some kids did say things like this, which is pretty amazing. So it helps sort of get them in contact with those things that really matter, that are not goals or material goods, but rather directions. Okay? So now that we've had parents think about things that they care about, what might some behaviors be that might lead them in that direction? Okay? So we think about, next slide, actually, we'll stay on the goals, values, consistent behavior slide. So values are all about motivating behavior. Okay? They're all about motivating effective action in the direction that we care about. From a behavioral perspective, we think of valuing as a generalized operant. So it's a move that one learns based on the discrimination of, are you moving towards something that you care about, or are you moving away from something that you'd rather not have? Okay? As with any behavior, function is more important than what the behavior looks like. And I'll elaborate on that in a few minutes. Okay? The other cool thing that values do, or valuing does, is it changes the value of a stimulus. Okay? What that means is this. I'll give you an example. A long time ago, I worked with a family who was engaged in a parent training program for OCD in their 6-year-old child. And treating OCD is difficult. It involves exposure and response prevention if you choose to use the sort of gold standard treatment for OCD. That involves parents coaching their child to approach things that scare them, upset them, make them disgusted, and staying in that situation and experiencing all of those really difficult emotions and preventing the ritual that the child has used in the past to reduce those feelings. That's a tall order. You're literally asking for parents to harm or create stress, serious upset in their children in the service of what? Okay? So one way you could go with this is, well, it's in the service of making the OCD go away. That is true, and it certainly works if done well, and parents adhere. But when you put this in the context of valuing, think about this. Okay, how you might do that is you might ask, well, if OCD went away, what would life look like for your son or daughter? And this particular mom had this really beautiful image of her son playing soccer, running in a field joyfully with the sun in his hair, smiling, laughing, and being with friends. And as she described this to me, she started to tear up. And I almost started to tear up. In fact, I think I did. I was so moved by that. And I said, what if everything we do here, all of the hard stuff I'm going to ask you to do, all of the upset that comes from these exposure and response prevention exercises is in the service of that? Would you be willing to do this homework if it means you get a shot at that future for your son? So just like that, we changed the value of engaging in these exposure and response prevention exercises from being just aversive to a hopeful possibility. That's the power of valuing. Okay? So, back to the matrix, next slide. When we say we're moving towards things, hopefully we're moving towards values. Now, parents will choose these. These are things that will come from them. We should never, as clinicians or as parent trainers or as ABA therapists, tell parents what their values are. They generate them, okay? But just to give you an example, here's one of mine. And this might well be one of our parent earlier. Perhaps it's really important to her, our parent in the case study, to make a difference, okay? Think about all of the behaviors, the functions of all of these different behaviors with their different topographies that are in the service of making the difference, or could be in the service of making a difference. Being consistent, engaging in self-care. Perhaps this mom might contact, if I don't care for myself or take care of myself, I won't be effective for my child. Something as mundane as doing laundry could make a difference, okay? And parents showing themselves some self-compassion. If you're working with siblings, if you're working with any kids, modeling acceptance of difficult emotion, modeling frustration tolerance, that's in the service of making a difference. It could be planned ignoring, understanding that you might see an extinction burst here, and you should continue consistently ignoring a behavior. That's attention maintained so that it reduces, okay? Teaching, persisting your child, even if it's difficult and it takes many, many, many tries, and generalization is so hard, and initiating behaviors are so hard, shaping those over time and hours and hours and hours of ABA programming. Reaching out to other parents might be done in the service of the value of making a difference. Connecting, maybe offering up your own experiences as a parent. Making dinner, something as mundane as making dinner. Next slide. The trouble is, when folks engage in values-consistent behavior, very often obstacles show up along the way. So in this slide, here's some things that may show up. Frustration, boredom, negative thoughts and feelings that may get in the way. Okay? This is where the ACT question comes in. Are you willing, in the service of the things that you care about, to do these things that matter to help you be an effective parent? I'm going to skip ahead to our last couple of slides. Okay? So how might you use this approach? First, helping parents see and connect with what works and what doesn't. And next, helping them contact what are the things that they care about. How might you place this, or think about adherence to parent training? Well, willingness and committed action are two really important pieces of valuing. And you might ask a parent, like our example parent, are you willing to feel frustrated in the service of helping your child develop more effective social skills, or having better friendships, or moving in the world more freely? Okay? To do this sort of perspective taking, in which we kind of connect with what are the contextual features around parents, their difficult thoughts and emotions, reminds us as behavior therapists to use shaping with parents as well. Use small steps in designing your interventions, okay? And consider parent willingness to do things. Choose things they are willing and able to do. The smallest things that you know are kernels that are effective, and helping them engage with those things. As a therapist yourself, as an ABA therapist or a clinician working for parents, it's important to be a good source of information. So being accurate in describing what will happen if they continue to engage, in a really adherent way in parent training? And what will happen if they use it inconsistently? And then using perspective taking with parents, as we mentioned, and bringing everything back to not telling them what's going to happen, but helping them contact it on their own. So to our mom who feels not enough, our question is the ACT question. Are you willing, in the service of those things that you care most about, to do what you need to do, even when things are really, really difficult? And so last slide, if you'd like to find out more, there are tons of resources on the ACVS website. ACVS stands for the Association for Contextual and Behavioral Science. I'm located in New England. We have a website there as well. Feel free to contact us at our New England website. And thank you so much for attending this webinar. This is my little guy. This is Rory at a science fair. I just wanted to show you he's cute. So thank you very much for attending.